My name is Tom Cody. I'm from Illinois. I bought this car approximately 35 years ago. It came in early primer and 7 boxes, and the engine was in storage someplace. Car's got a 30-year restoration on it, still looks good, drives well. No air conditioning, of course, at that time, but we could use some when it gets a little warm some days. But other than that, they were great cars. In fact, they were so great I bought the second one. But at the time, this was the first car Cunningham that was restored completely and done to the current standards. It's been to Pebble Beach. That was its second show. It took best in its class at Meadowbrook up in Detroit area. It wins awards wherever it goes. This particular Cunningham has the same chassis as all the rest. It's known as a one-off. The chassis is a standard C3 chassis. But the designer and the builder were different than these cars. Vignali did the work on these. Brooks Stevens out of Wisconsin was a car designer. A gentleman in Wisconsin bought the car, knew Brooks, had him design the car. A man in Indianapolis named Jones built the car by hand. So the body is totally different than all the others.
Good morning, my name is John Giltonan. I'm one of the curators for the antique car collection at the Elliott Museum in Stuart, Florida. We're very pleased to be here today. This Cunningham is particularly important to the museum because it was made in West Palm Beach, which is only about 35 miles from our location in Stuart. This is one of the 5 cabriolets that was made by Cunningham in 1953. The car's been in the museum's collection since 1982. Yeah, the car's had 3 engines in it. The original owner changed out the original Chrysler 331 Hemi and put a supercharged 1955 Cadillac Eldorado engine in it. That engine was later replaced with a 1958 Chrysler 392 Hemi, which is the engine that's in it now. The original color was Palm Beach green and cream. It was changed many years ago to this blue and silver livery, and it has a silver leather interior and a Chrysler PowerFlight automatic transmission.
All right, my name is Jim Taylor. I'm a vintage classic car collector. We found this car in the basement of a barn in Virgins, Vermont, at a restorer's shop in pieces. I recognized I'd seen the car before. I wasn't sure what it was, and I asked the guy what it was, and he said it's a Cunningham. We had actually seen one. We'd done a cross-country road rally. We stopped at Bob Lutz's place in Michigan for a dinner. And the one that's down here that his ex-wife still owns is the one I had seen. That's how I knew the car. So anyway, we made a deal to have it restored and had some problems. We actually had 4 different restorers before we finally did the final work ourselves with the car over a 12-year period. And it's been to several shows. It was awarded a 2nd class at Pebble Beach, 1st in class at Amelia Island, best of show at Mistlewood in Massachusetts, and best in class at Quail last year. So it's been around, and I don't normally restore cars to pristine. Most of my cars are drivers in my collection. Many of them are actually original cars and barn finds. But it's a fabulous car. We've had a lot of fun with it. I wish I fit in it a little better. It looks big, but it's not very big.
Okay, I'm Jimmy Dobbs from Palm Beach, Florida and Memphis, Tennessee. This is my 1953 C3 Cunningham Coupe. I bought it 20 years ago at an auction in Monterey, California. Since that time, we've enjoyed all kinds of trips. We've been on European rallies with the car. We've done the Colorado Grand, I think, several times with the car and other rallies, and drive it regularly. It's great shape, pretty much like I got it at the auction. Got a 331 cubic inch Chrysler engine, which we warmed up a little bit. We put a little heat in the engine. I've raced it at the Sears Point racetrack, road raced it, and had absolutely zero trouble with it. Living in Palm Beach, of course, Rick Cunningham was from there, and I have a small office on the same street where he built these cars, just coincidentally. I'm also lucky enough to own the 55 Thunderbird that's here at this event that he kept in France when he was racing. And since then had subsequent owners, and it was sold right here to him new in Westport, Connecticut, Ford dealership. And other than that, I'm so thrilled that all these other fabulous Cunningham owners and cars are here. This is really fabulous to have so many of these cars, most of them, including race cars.
So my name is Kara Canham. I'm from California, and this is my 1952 Cunningham C3. It's 5210, so it was the fifth C3 that was built. I've had it for about 2.5 years, and he is affectionately known as Swifty. The car was restored in the early 2000s. When it came into my ownership, I redid the interior in the car, basically to create more authenticity. One of the unique things and that I love the most about the car is a number of original items. As an example, the glass with the stampings. It has the first Chrysler Fluidmatic transmission, semi-automatic transmission. It's a bit of a bear to drive because he's rather large, but that Hemi V8 engine, when you get the car on the road, it's a magnificent feeling. In addition to refreshing the interior, I also had the custom fitted luggage made for the car, which is kind of funny because there's no back seat in the C3. So if you don't have the luggage in there, there's just an open well. But with the luggage, I think it's really spectacular and looks really great. In addition, a little bit different, the car, I retained hubcaps for the car. It also does not have bumpers, which I actually prefer because it adds, I think, to the overall design, is a little bit cleaner with that as well. Color-wise, this was the original color combination for the car. And the original interior was a gray, all gray interior, and I actually did the two-tone interior to match, the inserts match the exterior color of the car. Important to remember, these cars, no two obviously are alike, and so it allows you to see, as you do here, so many different variations on a theme.
My name's Tom Cotter, and I'm the proud owner of one of the ugliest Cunninghams on the planet, which is number 5207. This car was the second car built on the C3 assembly line of 25. This is the second, that's the first. And this was a media car. So at one time, this car looked pretty. It won the first place at the Watkins Glen Concours d'Elegance in 1952. It won first place at the Concours d'Elegance in Elkhart Lake in 1952. It was featured in magazines and books. I have copies of all of them. But then, as like many cars, it kind of fell into disrepair. And I found this in a basement in Greenville, South Carolina about 12 years ago. I restored it mechanically. It's got a Chrysler Hemi engine with 4 carburetors, a 3-speed Cadillac transmission. But I left the body and just the way I found it. Somebody painted it like this in the 60s, and I just left it that way. I might restore it one day to look as pretty as these, but I might not. I bring this to Concours d'Elegance. I do hill climbs with it. I'm going to race it at Lime Rock this Labor Day. So it's my all-purpose car. It's a hot rod. It's a classic car. It's a big car for 2 people. I got to say, 3,200 pounds, huge Hemi engine, just for two people. So it was the most expensive American car at the time. It would cost $9,000 for this coupe. You could buy 3 Cadillacs for that price in 1952. But it's a car I dreamed about owning my whole life, and I happened to just find one, which was just an amazing stroke of luck. You're probably wondering why I'm wearing this coat. This actually is Bruce Cunningham's personal coat. He got this in 1926 when he was a freshman at Yale. And his name is embroidered in there, and the name of the store that he bought it at in Cincinnati, where he grew up. But he lived most of his adult life in Greens Farm, Connecticut, which is about 15 miles east of here on Long Island Sound. So the fact that we have all these Cunninghams and this coat at this show is kind of appropriate to the family lineage and heritage in this area and the cars. So thanks for having me.
Hi, I'm Denise Lutz. This is my Cunningham C3 Vignale Coupe in 1953. It was the 27th one made of all the Cunninghams out of the number. And we have Chuck Schondorf and Tom Cotter to thank for pulling all of us together, people who are like-minded and have this real enthusiasm for our beautiful cars. It's a great touring car. It doesn't like stop and go traffic and hills and being in first gear, but it's great. It's great on the straightaway. It's comfortable. And there's a little room in the back for luggage. But I think the most wonderful thing is having everybody here at this marvelous event and seeing the differences of our cars. I don't know if this will ever happen again, but it's a miracle that we have this today. And so in this beautiful setting. So I hope that everybody here at the Concours will enjoy these Cunninghams as much as we are, and it's really a pleasure for me to be here.
Hi, my name is Lou Nathan-Schoen, and my wife Abby and I own this Cunningham. It was like the other C3s made in 1952, but apparently wasn't sold for a while, so it was renumbered 5440 by the factory. And it's gone through many hands. I was fortunate today to meet the gentleman who owned the car in the 1950s, and he said he had gotten into an accident and had spent time in a junkyard. And I met another Cunningham owner today who said he ended up with the dashboard and instruments from it that in another of the cars here. I was fortunate during the restoration process to find one of the unbodied but complete Cunningham chassis that had been on a farm in Wisconsin for 40 or more years, and the farmer put a radiator and a seat on it and drove it around his farm, but it never went very far, so it remained very, very original. Even the wheels and tires were original on it. And I was able to access parts, particularly the 4-car-blog manifold and the transmission that would have been the same as should have been in this car. And
the car I'm standing next to is a Cunningham C3 Coupe. It's the first Cunningham I bought, which was 12 years ago. I bought the car completely in pieces and missing a lot of pieces, and I spent 5 years at that time having it restored. I've been driving the car thousands of miles ever since and having a wonderful time with it. This particular car has a lot of interesting features. It's the only C3 that was fitted out for racing by the Cunningham shop in West Palm Beach, Florida. And it had certain features like hood straps, oversized fuel tank, and air scoops on the front drum brakes. I'm now standing next to the last Cunningham C3 car that I acquired. It's another C3 Coupe, and this is an interesting car. It had not run in over 40 years, and I bought it from an older gentleman who finally came to the conclusion it was probably not going to get completed in his lifetime. So I was in the right time and place and bought it 2 years ago. Once again, another Cunningham in pieces, totally dismantled and in need of a complete building. This car is unique because, according to records and everything we can, all the details that we find in the car was sent in 1956 to Bill Frick on Long Island. Bill Frick was a master car builder, and he had spent several years working for Briggs Cunningham, but after the shop closed in 1955 in West Palm Beach, Frick went back to Long Island and opened his own shop, and he proceeded to build lots of cars under the name of Studilac, Frick Specials, and he took on assignments such as this one, where he removed the original Chrysler Hemi engine, installed the latest and greatest Chrysler Hemi engine, which was from a Chrysler 300B. It was advertised to have 340 horsepower with two 4-barrel carburetors. Well, in addition to the bigger and more powerful motor, Frick installed a McCulloch supercharger on the motor, and probably gave it another 20 or 30% power. Frick installed a manual transmission for more performance, and this consequently is the only Cunningham with a supercharger today. Non-original, but a period modification, which to me is something that's very much worth keeping. So, standing next to a Cunningham C3 Cabriolet, one of only 5 cabriolets that were bodied at Vignale for Cunningham, and I found this car in New Jersey in the hands of an owner. Nearly lost the hood. In the hands of an owner down there, in whose family it was for several decades, and I called him to see if I could just visit him and see what condition the car was in and so on, not to acquire it, but just to assess it and to encourage him to get the car on the road, either restore it or just put it back together and start driving it. Well, long story short, he winds up selling me the car in pieces, almost completely dismantled. And to me, the car was in good enough condition and had sufficient potential to just be restored back to being a running car. And so that's what we did with this. It's all original interior. We did reupholster the seat because we had no choice. The original was in tatters, but otherwise it's all original interior. And we installed a new convertible top because from time to time they do tend to wear out. But what's interesting about this car, besides being one of the 5 cabriolets, is that back in the 50s, the owner at that time made some modifications to the motor. In particular, they put an Edmunds intake manifold on the car. Now, Edmunds was a fellow in Southern California who made cast aluminum intake manifolds for all kinds of American cars. It could be a 6, an 8, a V8, a straight 8, and typically what he would do is double the carburation. So in this case, he made a cast aluminum intake manifold for a 331 Hemi engine with 2 4-barrel carburetors. So on account of it being what I call a period modification in the 50s, I think it's very valid to keep and maintain today. The other things that they did at that time were they converted it over to a manual shift transmission. In this case, they used a Packard 3-speed, they retained the column shift, and then they added a Borg-Warner overdrive to the car, which makes for much more enjoyable driving. Another modification at that time was the addition of Dayton wire wheels, and the car was not delivered with the wire wheels. It was an option, but subsequently someone installed Dayton wire wheels in the 50s, and very nice feature. There's one other feature about this car that I think is worth noting, and that's on the trunk of the car. And what it is a pair of crossed flags, and this sort of a badge was very common, was very common on Italian coach-built cars, and typically they would combine the flag of the chassis builder with the flag of the coach builder, in this case Cunningham Vignale. As far as we can tell, 2 cars were delivered this way, this one and another cabriolet. The other cabriolet is missing its flags, so This is the only car that still has that feature today.
Good morning, I'm Larry Berman, and for the last 15 years I have been the Cunningham Motorsport historian as a hobby. I own the website www.briggscunningham.com, and the purpose of the website is to honor Mr. Cunningham, who was a very unique individual. As many people know, he won the America's Cup with his yacht, the Columbia, in 1958. He attempted to win the Le Mans race for 16 years. He came third as his best attempt. And in the process, he created a series of Vignale-bodied road cars. Yesterday, I looked to the skies and the sun and felt that he was looking down upon all of his children, all aligned for the first time in history. The car that I'm standing next to is number 5219, which is owned by Jay Leno. Jay bought the car about 2 years ago. It was white with its original red interior, and as soon as he received it, I had a model painted the original colors with the request that during the full restoration that the car be painted in its original colors. And as you can see, it's magnificent. It is perfect in every way and a true example of the Cunningham C3s. They all have 331 Chrysler Hemi engines as a result of a relationship between Mr. Cunningham and a Yale classmate whose father at the time in 1952 was the president of Chrysler Motor Corporation. We have all 25 of the Vignale body cars, all of the significant race cars, and it's felt by the organizers, Chuck Schoendorf, Tom Cotter, and myself as a minor role as the historian, that this will never happen again because it's never happened before.
I'm Bob Williams, and for many years I've driven this car, both as an owner and as a good friend of the current owner, Dr. Fred Simeone. And in those years, and 11,000 miles, there's a whole family of stories. And one of the most telling, I think, is the story of Briggs's last ride in the C4R. We were at Palm Springs, and Phil Hill couldn't make it to be the driver, so I was recruited, and it was my pleasure to take him around the course. And it was a street course around downtown Palm Springs. And so in that context, he was in the passenger seat and I was driving, and we were going around the course, and then there was, I think, 2 or 3 laps, and we came on the short straight, and he pushed his fist forward and said, in a gesture, "Give it all you've got." And so I took that with me a little later to when we had the car at Le Mans. And every time I came on the Mulsanne straight, I gave it all we had in memory of Briggs Cunningham's last ride. I've driven this car at times in the late fall or in the cold of Colorado for the Colorado Grand in the high mountains. And the transmission is right under here, and a lot of heat comes back from it. And so on those colder days, I found myself putting my hands down there just to keep my hands warm. It's another built-in feature that not everybody knows about. This is a 24-hour clock, and it was built for Le Mans. And right here, that little light, that was tied into the braking system, and it would go on, the idea was, it would go on when the brakes were half shot. That is, they would need to be replaced. Unlike today's racing cars, where they think nothing of replacing the whole braking system in a pit stop, the goal here was to get to the end of the race and have no brakes. And so the light would come on when it was 50% used, that is the brakes and the drum brakes. And that was, for its day, the early 1950s, advanced, and people are sometimes appreciative of knowing that dimension of the car.
Well, my name is Larry Fitzenmeyer, and I hail from Tucson, Arizona. But before we get any further in this, I want my crew chief to come over here and join me. This is my wife, Jan. We are delighted to be here. What a wonderful show. The weather has given us a great break, and we're all looking at more Cunninghams than have ever been together any place ever. And the car behind me is our car. It is one of 4 C4R continuation cars that was actually built in the mid-90s by a guy named Larry Black and Briggs Cunningham's son, who is Briggs III. 4 of these cars were built. This was the first. This was the prototype. During testing and development, this car was driven by John Fitch, by Phil Walters, by Denise McCluggage, and some of the other really notable names in the Cunningham world. And so it's got, although it's not a historic car, and that's important to remember, these 4 cars are not cars that were raced by Briggs. These are later cars, but they all have their own history. What we'll do here for a minute is open the hood. Nothing surprising under the hood for a Cunningham enthusiast. It's a 331 Chrysler Hemi engine, the first generation Chrysler, and almost all of Mr. Cunningham's cars had this particular engine in it. And if you're a hot rodder at heart, this kind of engine kind of gives you the goosebumps because it's a big chunk of engine. Those are 4 Weber 48 IDA carburetors. I've done a little bit of hot rodding to the engine, but not too much. I expect it has about 325, maybe 350 horsepower. But the car only weighs about 2,300 pounds, so when you're in a straight line and you put your foot down, you go. Steering wheel looks like it came right out of a Greyhound bus. But the reason it is angled like that, Mr. Cunningham's star driver was a gentleman named Phil Walters, who was a superb driver. He came from the circle track world, drove midgets and some bigger circle track cars, and he liked the steering wheel angled like that because he liked to get his shoulders into driving the car. And so Mr. Cunningham built his cars with that thought in mind and with driver Phil Walters in mind. Of the 4 continuation cars, I mentioned that this was the first one built. This was the prototype. Some of the work was done on this in Seattle, and later it and the whole program was moved to Lime Rock, Connecticut. The intention originally was for the Cunningham family to keep this car, this first car. That never happened, but it was used as the demonstration car. And when this first one was built in 1997, this was the car that was in all the magazines. All the journalists drove this car. You'd give them the keys, they'd go drive it for 20 minutes, give the keys to the next guy, and just thrash the daylights out of the thing. So when we got it, we did a lot of work on it. We did a lot of restoration work on it. And in reality, that also makes it the last Cunningham sold. A very knowledgeable Cunningham enthusiast would note that possibly these continuation cars are not all identical, and that's true. These cars themselves were made one at a time, and they were made intending to replicate the two original C4Rs, one of which is in the Simeone Museum, one of which is in the Collier Museum. And those two cars that these replicate, they were not identical. So when you line all four of the continuation cars up, they are not identical. Very close. But of course, as I'll back up and say, the original cars were not identical either. So there's nothing new going on here with hand-built cars.
So it's great to be here at this Cunningham gathering. I've got my car, which is a Cunningham C2, which was one of the first series of cars that he built to race at Le Mans in '51. This car was, the C2s were the fastest cars at Le Mans, though they didn't finish the highest because of other issues. But they were a terribly fast car for the day, powerful, macho kind of car. And it's great to be here in Connecticut with all these cars, and seeing them all together is a real treat. So this car's been in my family for since the mid-90s, and I'm lucky to have it as the second owner in my family, and I love driving it. It was an intimidating car the first time I drove it, but the more I've driven it, the more enjoyable it becomes.
How often do you take it out?
I've put about 4,000 miles on the car in the past 5 years, so I've had some time behind the wheel, and I've really enjoyed it. It's an interesting car, but a lot of people haven't seen one of these. Obviously, they're pretty rare. So when you do see one on the road, it's always a treat. And yes, it's fun for people to see a car like this on the road.
My name's Lise Jante. This is my husband, Jeffrey Heller. We met many years ago at the Pebble Beach Concours d'Elegance because both of us love cars. My grandfather is Briggs Cunningham. And Jeffrey and I met because we wanted to talk about his cars, and we fell instantly in love.
We met about cars, and we met at the front door of the Pebble Beach Lodge at noon on the day of the concourse. So that's our anniversary.
So we have a Cooper Monaco here at the Greenwich Concourse, and I'll let you take it away.
Okay, so Lisa and I have been together for several years now, and about 4 years ago, I told her that I had seen this Cooper Monaco that her granddad had owned at a shop that dealt with exotic cars out in the Bay Area in San Francisco where we live. And she said, don't you dare. And I said, oh, okay. And then 2 weeks later I said, yeah, I think I'm going to get it. And I did.
And,
so
and the reason I said don't you dare is my grandfather said don't ever collect cars.
Yeah. And so I vintage race it, and I've collected a history on it, and it's on exhibit here today. And I have this, amongst the things I have this great photo of her granddad in the car in the period. And it was a very winning car. It won Watkins Glen, it won Bridgehampton a couple of times. Walt Hanskin drove it. Get a lot of fun out of it, and I've wanted a vintage race for years and years, but with Lise and me in the car now, it's kind of opened this whole great world of doing things. And then we got invited to this concourse, and I don't usually show it. In fact, I never show it. But getting invited to this, we knew we had to come, so we put it on a truck, and it came across the country. So this is a 1961 Cooper Monaco. The car was originally raced in the first year by Bruce McLaren. He was actually working for the Cooper Car Company at the time. he got a guy named Peter Berry to buy it for him, and he brought it to the West Coast because that's where the money was, and raced it on the West Coast, and then sold it as a roller with no engine to Briggs Cunningham, who then brought it to Lance Raventlo's shop down in Southern California, and they stuffed this giant Buick V8 in it. So Briggs thought he could crush the competition with a monster engine. He was correct. He had Walt Hanskin drive it. It won Watkins Glen. It won Bridgehampton a couple of times. It featured in a lot of big races and would come in either first or it would break often because it has a Cooper gearbox, and the Cooper gearbox, this is the original gearbox for the car, and it would break often because the engine was so powerful.
My name is Colin Comer, and I'm here with my 1958 Lister Jaguar. They call it a knobbly Jag. That was a Cunningham team car from 1958 through 1960. So 3 years with the Cunningham team, driven by Briggs Cunningham, Sterling Moss, John Fitch, Walt Hanskin, Eddie Crawford, who was the primary driver of the car. Many other famous drivers. Kind of unique in that regard is that it was 3 years on the team and so many people drove it. It was a very competitive car, so they just kept racing it. Most team cars are 1 or 2 years at best. This one won the 1958 SEC National Championship, won a number of races. The two Lister Jaguars that Cunningham had, this one is chassis number 102 again, and the other one is 101. And both still exist today and are still racing today, which is another really cool fact and what I appreciate about the cars. So these were well ahead of their time, four-wheel disc brakes, reliable Jaguar power. The reason why they won so much, they were just far ahead of their time for what they were, and in the sports racing cars of the day, most of them were still disc brake or drum brakes and didn't have the kind of horsepower and torque and reliability that a Jaguar engine had. So I purchased a car in 2012 from a fellow that I know, and he owned it for a number of years, and all of us, it's raced continuously in vintage events since 1984. It raced through the 60s and then had a off period where, like most old race cars, was dormant, but then brought back, it's raced in Europe extensively. It's raced on this side back in the US extensively as well. Fantastic vintage race car. I race it again quite a bit, and I've also taken it on 1,000-mile road rallies and tours. We did the road tour here on Friday, partly in the rain, which was a blast because a high horsepower car and skinny tires, there's nothing better than that in the rain.
Hello, my name is Kevin McKay. I have a Corvette restoration shop called Corvette Repair Incorporated in Valley Stream, Long Island, New York. This is a car that we actually found probably back in 2000, actually. It's owned by Lance Miller from the Miller family, whose dad, Chip, was a very, very dear friend of mine, Chip Miller, who was the founder of Carlisle Events. 1960 Corvette, Briggs Cunningham Le Mans Corvette. 8th overall, first in class in 1960, 24 Hours of Le Mans. It was the first Corvette effort back in 1960. The car was converted to a street car back in St. Louis. It was owned by a guy named James Walsh, and we hunted him down back in the 90s. We were able to get the car sometime about 2000, 2001. Restored it in 2002 for Monterey for the 75th anniversary of GM, and we completely restored the car. We had just under 4,000 man hours in restoring the car. The car was very original. Like I said, it was converted back to a street car. It was a Renault Red street car. The guy had no idea what he had. It took us 7 years to get the car from the gentleman, and Chip said, "Kevin, if you ever decide you want to sell this car, this is my very, very favorite car of all times." We were best of friends, so I gave the car when I was able to get it, and we did the restoration on it, and the car basically speaks for itself. But what's really neat about it, there were actually 4 cars that went to Lamar in 1960. Car number 1, car number 2, car number 3 were the Cunningham cars, and there was a private entry car called the Camerati car. The number 1 car had red headlight covers, the number 2 car had blue headlight covers, and the number 3 car had red headlight covers. And also the same with the roof lights too. They were red, white, and blue. So all 3 cars have survived. We located 2 out of the 3 cars. But this is, in my opinion, probably the best one because it actually won its class at Lamar 8th overall. So 8th overall and first in class. It's probably a world record for having all these Cunningham cars here at one location. Just truly amazing. And I'm glad we're a part of it.
The car I'm standing next to is a C4RK Cunningham. It's not the original car, it is a one-off copy of the one-off original car. The original car is kept at the, it's in the Collier Museum at Rebs Institute in Naples, Florida. And at this point in the car's life, it no longer leaves the museum. It's regarded as a museum piece, which it is. And consequently, the only people who get to see it are visitors to the museum and no otherwise people who happen to see photographs of it. But the project came about 5 years ago when it was discovered that a chassis was left over from the 90s when Briggs Cunningham's son, Briggs III, built 4 continuation cars. They were recreations of the original C4R racing roadsters. Well, turns out while he built 4 complete cars, he built 5 chassis. So the chassis for this car was the leftover 5th chassis from the 90s, and it turned out at the time that I found it that I had a 1952 Chrysler firepower engine all set up, ready to go with no place to go. So I spoke with the family and I said I wanted to do something with them, with the chassis and my motor, and they said, well, what's a good idea? Well, I said, you've reproduced the Roadster 4 times. No one's ever reproduced the coupe, and there's only one, and it never leaves the museum. So they said, fine, let's go for that. So that's what we did, and the project started by getting permission from Miles Collier to do a scan of his car, a 3D scan, without touching the car. And the data from that resulted in the construction of a wooden buck on which aluminum panels were formed to be the body that you see today. It's all aluminum. All along the way, over the 5 years, I was busy finding bits and parts and pieces such as the Halabrand magnesium wheels, the spinners for the wheels, the tail lights, which happen to be from a 1950 Pontiac. And you could say, well, what's up with that? Well, that's what they put on the race car in 1952 to have rear illumination. And lots of other features about the car, the headlights, the driving lights, the steering wheel, the instruments. These cars were originally fitted out with a 24-hour clock, which came from a B-17 bomber. And I was lucky enough to find one of those on eBay. And so it's been a 5-year build and also a 5-year search of the parts and details to make this the car that you see now. And unlike the car in the museum, this car will be used. It'll be out and about and driven everywhere. People will allow it to be driven on or off the track. Never driven in anger on the track, but perhaps parade laps or demonstration laps. So there you have this car. And this project, by the way, was just completed. The car was not painted until 6 weeks ago, and now we're in the process of sorting it out on the road, getting all the systems to work, and we're having a great time with it.
Things about the evolution of the Cunningham cars, starting with the C2s and going through the 4s, 5s, and 6s, is that, and this is my theory, is that Briggs was inspired by the design of the winning Le Mans car from the prior year to the year in which he was going to enter his new model. So, what do I mean by that? The C2R, albeit much larger, looks very much like it's been informed by Ferrari Barchetta styling of 1949, 1950. We then move forward in time to the C4s, which again are a more sophisticated take on what Ferrari was building at that time. Now, in 1952, the Jaguar people showed up with streamlined C-type Jaguars. And if we look at the C5, what we see is an enormous streamliner C-type Jaguar. The next evolution that I think caught Briggs's attention was the D-type Jaguar. And if we look at the C6, we see something that looks remarkably like a D-type Jaguar. Now, is that pure chance? Is that intentional? I don't know, but I noticed these correspondences, and it seems to me that in that day where people didn't have wind tunnels, didn't think about wind tunnels, you grabbed your inspiration where you can find it, and why isn't the best inspiration the cars that won Le Mans the year prior? So I suggest that may have had more than a little to do with how the form of the various racing Cunninghams evolved. We also see some common responses to universal problems that existed with racing cars at this period. Recall that most of the D-types, or at least there was a generation of D-types that had fins on their headrests. The reason for that was ostensibly described as putting feathers on the arrow to keep the car essentially moving in the right direction, and that would help dealing with odd handling artifact. Of course, at the time, nobody understood that odd handling artifact had nothing to do with putting feathers on the arrow. It was basically the fact that they were experiencing aerodynamic lift, which made the car extremely squirrely. And so the rudder on the headrest was really treating the symptom, and it wasn't treating the actual cause. And lo and behold, here on the C6, we see exactly the same thing. Mm-hmm. The question that I don't know the answer to was, did Briggs do that because they had experience with odd handling because of speed, or was it more a case, and I don't mean this in a denigrating way, monkey see, monkey do that, like it's working for Jaguar, we ought to use a rudder too. It probably will help the stability and will make it easier for our drivers. We don't know the answer to that. Right. Another interesting theme that sort of runs through the development of the racing Cunninghams is this understandable obsession with brake cooling. So, walking back again to C4, we see that the front of the car is, and maybe it's the car behind you is the best one, we see that the extensive cutting away of the body, which exposes the barn door scoops to the brakes. And the nice thing is you can just see those are absolutely not concealed behind any kind of a modesty panel or anything else. There they are. And that was required by the Cunningham cars because they were using American equipment, which was big, it was heavy, there was no lightweight speed equipment in the day. These cars were made as small and light as Briggs could make them, but by Le Mans racing car standards, that wasn't very small nor very light. And so the brakes were the limiting factor. So this was one response. The next response that we see is the evolution of the C5 and this sort of Joker smile that we see on the front of the car is largely, again, a response to trying to get enough air to the brakes. The oval section, of course, is air to the radiator, but the sides of the mouth are basically enormous scoops to get air into the 17-inch diameter drum brakes that this car had. Now, the drum brakes of the C5 Cunningham are actually bigger in diameter than the wheels. So the drum brakes are actually inset from the wheels themselves so that they would receive the maximum amount of air cooling. And again, the problem was very fast car, poor brakes, and as we know, this car finished third at Le Mans. and was beaten by the brand new application of disc brakes to the C-Type Jaguar, which didn't require the kind of cooling and had much more efficiency.
What I noticed on this was that the C4 has the brake in the rear fender to bring in, and the 6 does, but the 5 doesn't.
Yeah, I mean, the C4s when they were first built did not have slots in the rear fenders. I don't know what the genesis of those was. Maybe there was a thought that the brakes in the rear needed some help. As most people know, the front brakes of a car, and it's absolutely true of a racing car, do about 65-70% of the braking. So the front brakes are the ones that are taking most of the load. But I think Briggs's idea, or his designer's idea about brakes, was if some air is good, more air is better, and just a ton of air is best of all. We can see on the C6, for example, that look at the nose on this car. This is, as this car developed, it started life with a 180 cubic inch Offenhauser engine, modified to race on a road course, so it was given Weber carburetors, a generator, starter, hooked up to a ZF transmission. And when that didn't work, Briggs modified this car to accept Jaguar power plant and Jaguar transmission and a Jaguar nose. When they put the Jaguar nose on, they needed to allow for massive amounts of air that the drum brakes of the C6 required. Remember, the D-Type Jaguar was a disc brake car. So what we see is these huge sewer pipes of a brake duct to the front brakes of the C6 Cunningham. Now, what I find particularly fascinating, and we don't have it here to look at synoptically, is the 1955 D-Type Jaguar that Briggs ran in conjunction with the C6 Offenhauser at Le Mans, ultimately received identical front-end treatment with these huge brake orifices built into the front of the car. And the thing is that a D-Type Jaguar doesn't require that kind of cooling. But Briggs wasn't taking a chance. He knew that if some air is good, more air is better, and that's what that was all about. So people who look at that D-Type Jaguar say, what the heck happened to that thing? And it was just Briggs' idea that, boy, you can't have enough air. And I think that's probably what the rear brake situation here was, is that the idea was they're just going to get more air back there. And remember, the one thing about this car is a inboard drum brake rear suspension. So the problem with inboard brakes is they see no air at all unless you put it there. And so I think that was a response to the fact that the car had inboard brakes, not outboard brakes.
Hi, I'm Richard Harmon, an Englishman who's been a lifelong fan of Briggs Cunningham, his cars, which I first learned about as a kid. Small models, dinky toy models of his racing cars, the white cars with twin blue stripes, which we can all see around here. That sparked my enthusiasm for his work. A lifetime after that, when I was working and studying motor racing and watching races all over the world, it came to pass that I thought back to the time about Briggs Cunningham, and I wanted to find out more about him. There was little information out there, snippets, race reports of the races he competed in, but it became apparent that nobody had covered his whole effect on the American racing scene in those early 50s and onwards. And as an Englishman, I felt, well, how come no American has done this? And I chewed it over and I thought, well, I'd like to have a go at this. And in starting that, I didn't realise that it would be a 10-year adventure of meeting so many people, so many similar enthusiasts of the man and his cars, and owners of the cars. And it blossomed into quite an epic volume. It stretched into 2 volumes. There was that much information. Cunningham's family, Briggs himself died in 2003. His family were most supportive, gave me a lot of information. I stayed with several of them and learnt about their recollections of their father and grandfather, Briggs Cunningham. And they were all gave me such support and said, yes, somebody wants to have done this. And I said, well, how come no American has done this? And they said, well, they don't know the reason for it. And I wanted to put that right. After Briggs's death, I thought, he's not going to be forgotten. He's got a huge legacy. As we can see in this show today and in previous shows, the owners of the Cunningham cars are a strong bunch, and we have managed to pull them together into one group. And they're so eager to show their cars. And many Americans who come to these popular shows used to say, we've never ever seen a Cunningham, but maybe you've never heard of them. But that has come about now, and the name is out there. All the owners are most appreciative of having the shows to show them all. And I think it's absolutely wonderful. The people like Chuck, Tom Cotter, and the other owners love the man, love the cars, and want to show them. And my book, luckily, was very well received. And they all, nothing but praise for it. And as an Englishman, I'm really proud to have made that contribution to this wonderful man, his cars, his history. A truly remarkable man.
Hi, I'm Peter Bodensteiner with Stanson Speed Publishing, and a few years ago, a friend of mine, Peter Harholt, who's a photographer, and I started a book series, Stanson Speed Monograph series, and we chose as our first subject the Cunningham C4RK. We went over to the Revs Institute in Naples and shot the car there. Peter has a portable studio set up, and he's actually shot a number of cars there. But we had the chance to spend the day with the car and shoot it from every angle, and then I went into the library there at the Revs Institute, Miles Collier's museum there, and did a lot of research on the car, and ended up writing this book, which has been fortunately very well received by the Cunningham crowd. I'm very gratified by that, and even more gratified by this car here. Obviously debuting here is a recreation of the C4RK that Chuck did, and a lot of very skilled people, and they've told me that they used the book for reference as they were building this car, and that's, like I said, incredibly gratifying to hear that. You know, I put a lot of work into this book, as short as it is. It's only 32 pages, but there's a lot of research, a lot of great history with Briggs Cunningham. I got to talk to John Fitch, fortunately, who's now passed away, and just getting to even vicariously get to enjoy and learn about all the history of this car and Briggs Cunningham in general was just a lot of fun. It was a great project.
My name is Mark Barton. I'm from the Panel Shop, Inc. We're a panel shop, and we fabricate complete bodies like this. Luckily, 3 years ago, we were asked to be involved in this project, and it's a project that many, many years ago I really wanted to build this particular car. I would have loved to have done it, and be careful what you wish for, because it came true. A year or so ago, I made most of the skins and stuff, and then at the end of last year, it was all in pieces, ready to put together, and Chuck says to me, can you get it done for the Greenwich car show? And I says, yes. So my son and I, we worked 7 days a week till late at night at Chuck's shop, and we got the project done for him. It's all aluminum, and there's a lot of interesting shapes on this car, as you can well see.
The great thing about the Cunningham class that we had here today was not just that we had Cunninghams, but we had other cars associated with Briggs Cunningham. And this is one of them. So if it doesn't look like a Cunningham, there's a reason for that, and it's a 1960 Corvette that Briggs Cunningham was associated with.
Briggs Cunningham competed at Le Mans in his own cars. You'll see some of them today. He built his own passenger cars, the C3s, of which we have 24 of the 25. And he raced a team of 3 Corvettes. And this one is owned by Lance Miller from Carlisle, Pennsylvania, the 1960 Corvette that was driven by John Fitch and Bob Grossman in the 1960 Le Mans, where it won a class victory. Briggs had Corvettes 1, 2, and 3. This is number 3. It's finished in the same livery as it was in 1960. Thank you, Lance, very much for bringing it. And this, of course, is the Award of Speed and Style presented by Alteza Restoration. This is a Cunningham C3. 25 of these were built, only 5 convertibles. This is the first of 5 convertibles. The body is by Vignali in Italy, powered by a 331 cubic inch Chrysler Hemi. These cars sold for $12,000 in 1954. The color is Palm Beach green, and the Cunninghams were built in West Palm Beach. This is owned by Richard and Karen Atwell from Fredericksburg, Texas. It's first in the in class in the cars of Briggs Cunningham. A lovely car. Rich and Karen, thank you for bringing it. That hasn't happened yet. So, this is Denise Lutz in a from Versailles, Kentucky, in a Cunningham C3 coupe. This particular car was on the cover of Mechanics Illustrated in 1953. Formerly owned by Bob Lutz, it just ran the New England 1000 last week. Denise, congratulations, and Tom Carter would like to say a few things about the Cunningham.
Briggs built these cars to be driven, not trailer queens, and this car's been well driven. Not only this past Friday, we did a 100-mile tour, but 2 weeks ago we did a 1,000-mile tour in this car. It's toured through the United States and it's toured through Europe. So this lady loves to drive this car, and it makes such good noise. The owner is Kara Cunningham from San Jose, California. This car has a local history. This was owned not terribly long ago by Bill Scheffler, right from here in Connecticut. Bill also used this car heavily in rallies, California Melee, Colorado Grand. This is the way a Cunningham would have looked if you bought one new in the 50s. Hubcaps, just proper, not souped up, but it makes good noise. Rev it up a little bit. Can you put it, see? It makes nice dual exhaust. It's got a 331 Chrysler Hemi with 4 single-barrel Zenith carburetors and dual exhaust. It was the best car you could build in a day. Thank you, Kara. This is an unusual Cunningham. It was not bodied by Vignali in Italy. It was bodied by Brooks Stevens in Wisconsin. When Cunningham built his 25 cars he had to build to homologate his race cars for Le Mans, they sold off some spare chassis. This was one of the spare chassis that Cunningham sold off. Brooks Stevens, who was working quite a bit with Studebaker at the time, bought this and bodied it. And if you look, it's got some Studebaker influences on the rear window quarter pillar line. It's got no trunk space at all. No trunk space and no door handles, which makes it difficult to steal. Thanks, Tom.
From the Robert M. Lee Automobile Collection in Sparks, Nevada. This is the first time this car has been shown since 1988. It was purchased by Nelson Rockefeller, and he ordered the special bumpers and wheel covers. Ann Lee has a fabulous collection, and here she is with her ex-Rockefeller Cunningham. Thank you, Ann.
Interestingly about this car, it was chosen by the Museum of Modern Art, MoMA, as one of the 10 most beautiful cars in the world in 1952. It was called 10 Automobiles. And this was featured at the museum that year with 9 other cars. So the museum curators thought that this was one of the most beautiful cars in the world. Thank you. This car, a 1952 Cunningham C4R, wins the Briggs Cunningham Award. It's presented by the Collier Collection, the Rez Institute in Naples, Florida. This is the stereotypical Cunningham. If you see a picture, a poster of a Cunningham, it's this car, a C4R. This car raced at Le Mans. It won at Watkins Glen. It won at Sebring and won at Elkhart Lake. It was driven by Briggs himself to a 4th place finish in 1952 at Watkins Glen. Just an amazing car that just worked. The cars prior to this didn't work anywhere near as this one worked, and not many cars after this would work well again. So, same engine, 331 Chrysler Hemi. Go over and take a look at it when it's parked. The next car, first in class, cars of Briggs Cunningham. This is a one-of-one C5R. This was the probably the most successful single car that Cunningham turned out of his West Palm Beach, Florida shop. The chassis was built there of tubes. The body was banged out there. It has a Hemi engine. This car finished 3rd place at Le Mans in 1953. Briggs built all those cars along the water, the C3s, so that he could race these cars and win at Le Mans. He never quite won, but he finished as high as 3rd. And this car has some dings and dents on it. This is just the way it came off the track. Thank you so much for bringing it.
we go. All right. Okay. This is the other C4R in the world. You just saw one by the Collier collection, and this one is owned by Fred Simeone of the Simeone Foundation and driven by Bob Williams, who used to own this car, and they worked out a unique relationship that Bob could borrow it back whenever he wanted to. This car raced Le Mans, Sebring, Watkins Glen, Elkhart Lake, all sorts of airport circuits. So again, there were two C4Rs in the world made, and they're both here on the lawn today. Thank you so much, Fred.
Pretty cool. Really.
Joseph Robillard from Matt Peckham, congratulations. Your 1952 Cunningham has won Best in Show Sport. It's a Cunningham C3 Coupe. Chassis number is 5206. Coachwork is by Vignali. And this one is a factory prototype, an extraordinarily rare car used for publicity photos for Road and Track. This Cunningham is documented all the way back to its first owner, and believe it or not, it just ran the New England 1000 this week.
This is number 5206. It was the first Vignali-bodied C3 ever built. He built, the Cunningham factory built two road cars prior to this. They tried to body them themselves in West Palm Beach. It was time-consuming, it was expensive, and the cars weren't as good-looking as this. So Giovanni Michelotti designed this, and Vignali built it in Italy. So they built the chassis. They were running chassis with 331 Chrysler Hemi engines. They originally came with a 3-speed Cadillac gearbox. They shipped those by freighter over to Torino, Italy, and they were bodied in aluminum over there and shipped back here and sold. It was the most expensive American car at the time. $9,000 for the coupe, and get this, $8,000 for the convertible. I don't know if you heard that before, but the coupe was more expensive than the convertible, and they were purchased by people like Carl Kiekhaefer and Nelson Rockefeller and people like that. So just a fabulous work of art. This car was restored outside of Seattle by Tom Armstrong about 2 decades ago, and it's just been so well preserved since. So Joe and Matt, thanks for bringing that baby out.
Last spring, I found out that the Greenwich Concours was featuring Bugattis in their event last year, and I thought to myself, gee, if they can feature Bugattis, maybe they'd be interested in taking Cunninghams for a reunion. So I pitched it to Mary Wennerstrom, the chairman of the event, and she said, sure, it sounds great. So over a year ago, we started working on this. My partner and collaborator on this effort, Tom Cotter, and I started reaching out to owners, finding them and encouraging them to get their cars ready for June of 2018. And it was fun, it was challenging. The results were, to our amazement, that we were able to get all 25 of the 25 Vignali-bodied Cunningham C3s to come to this event, and most of the raced cars. In fact, of the 36 cars that Cunningham built, there was one destroyed, so of the 35 remaining, we got 33 out of the 35 Cunningham-built cars to come out up here to Greenwich this weekend for this reunion gathering, just party of the celebrating Briggs Cunningham and his cars. It's extremely gratifying to see all these cars lined up like this. I mean, they're all similar, but they're all different. This is the first time in over 40 years that all of these cars run at the same time. So many of them were tied up in restoration projects, stalled projects, and the fact that they're all running now is miraculous. So I've been studying Cunningham cars for the past 10 or more years, and it's taken me over 10 years to see every Cunningham car ever built. Well, by coming to Greenwich this year, people could see all the cars in 25 minutes that took me 10 years to see. And so it's really an amazing opportunity to see such a comprehensive collection of Cunningham cars. This will never happen again, not anytime soon, if ever. It's just a one-off event, a one-off reunion of of a really important collection of cars.
"2018 was a great year at the Greenwich Concours, and it was definitely all about the Cunninghams. What started out as a Cunningham reunion turned into a grand celebration. I know that Briggs was with us and he was smiling down, so happy to see all of his beautiful cars and his family and friends and the car owners all gathered together to honor his legacy. None of this would have happened if it wasn't for the hard work of Chuck Schoendorf and Tom Cotter, and I appreciate so much all that they did, and I had so much fun working with them. I have to also give a big thank you to Miles Collier for being our Grand Marshal. We're so honored to have him in that role, and I think everyone can agree that he was the perfect person for it. Another thank you to Miles and to Scott George and everyone at Revs for sending up all of their beautiful cars and making the reunion so complete. I'm blown away at their generosity in doing this. I thank all of you for being with us. I had so much fun getting to know you before, during, and after the concours, and I hope you'll come back and be with us again. I have to give another thank you to Rich Taylor and to Charles Mallory, who arranged for Briggs's boats to be with us, his personal schooner Brilliant and his America's Cup yacht Columbia. That made it extra special. And I thank you all, and I will always look back on the 2018 Greenwich Concours with such happy memories.
Hi everyone, this is Scott George. I'm Vice President of the Revs Institute here in Naples, Florida, and Associate Curator of Miles Collier Collections here. And I've been involved here over 29 years and been fortunate enough to be to have worked on some of these Cunningham cars that sit around me, and also to drive them on tours, rallies, and around town. So, and occasionally on the track, but at exercise speeds. But I'm so sorry I didn't get a chance to make Greenwich, and Tom and Chuck for all the things, and everyone else that was involved for all the things that you did to help put it together. That's, you know, kudos and congratulations for that. But I'm glad we could be a part of it by sending a number of cars up. And I hope I can only be around long enough to see another gathering one day, but I think that is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity that I really regret not being able to make. But I put a couple of artifacts from the collections behind me that you might enjoy seeing. The sign that's behind me is from the old factory in West Palm Beach, and I thought you might get a kick out of seeing that. We have a lot of archives here, a lot of parts, a lot of things behind the scenes that people don't get a chance to see, but this sign we've recently done some conservation work on, and we'll be mounting it in a case here soon and having on display here at Revs. And this brake drum to my right is the C5R brake drum, and we have a set of those upstairs along with many spares for the C5 and other Cunningham racing cars. And a lot of people talk about these cars and explain about the drum size versus wheel size, and I just carried this one down from the parts room a few minutes ago, and I can attest that it is larger diameter than the wheel, and it is quite a piece of aluminum with an iron liner that it was pretty amazing what they fit onto these cars to try to get them to stop at the day. And I thought I'd share that with you today. But again, congrats on such a great gathering, and I'm sorry I couldn't be a part of it, but I'm glad our cars were there and some of our team as well, and look forward to seeing everyone soon. Come down and see us at Revs, and look forward to sharing a lot of other Cunningham cars with all of you.
Hello, my name is Pedro Vela. I'm a workshop assistant here at the Revs Institute for Automotive Research. I recently had the opportunity to attend the Greenwich Concours de Elegance. We took 5 of our Cunninghams up there. It was an amazing experience just being able to see all the cars there all together from Cunningham. starting with our race cars to another C4R, and then all the C3s that were there. I think there was only 2 missing, which was amazing. The event itself was very cool. I got to meet some amazing people, see some incredible cars, and actually had the opportunity and privilege of driving some of our Cunninghams to receive the awards. Mr. Collier allowed me to drive the car up and receive the award, which was mind-blowing. It was definitely a lifetime memory that I'll cherish for forever. The show, I had a fantastic time. One of my awesome experiences, I guess I could say, was I got the opportunity to meet David Hobbs, which he happened to be one of the judges there. I've known of him since I was a little kid. To me, he is the voice of Formula One, and when I heard him talking behind me, asking me to open up the hood of the cars, it was a surreal moment to hear his voice. And then later that night, I had the opportunity to sit down with him and actually talk about his life, and he asked me about my life a little bit, so that was a surreal moment. In the moment, I remember there was one part where they asked all of us to fire up all the engines of the Cunningham. So I believe mostly all the C3s fired up. We fired up our C6R, our C5R, and our C4R. And definitely hearing all the cars all at once was a moment that put some goosebumps on my skin. That definitely was a highlight of that day with everybody there and filming. And it was definitely an amazing time seeing all the cars and hearing all the engines roar.
A year ago, May, when Chuck Schondorf and Tom Cutter arrived at my house with Tom's Cunningham C3 and his bearskin coat, they had a big idea that they wouldn't let idle. The idea was to have everybody, all of the Cunningham owners, gather in Greenwich, Connecticut for the Concours d'Elegance this year. And the question was, would I bring my car? I agreed on the spot, and I went to Connecticut and had the time of my life. It was fun to be with so many of the other cars and to compare their similarities and yet their dissimilarities. But I certainly enjoyed meeting the people, and I enjoyed talking cars, and I enjoyed driving my car. It was a fine time, and I would highly recommend both things in the future. Hats off to those people who worked on this, to Chuck and Tom, and to Mary, and to all those people who had anything to do with this huge job of herding all the people, the activities and the cars together, and making it a wonderful time for everybody.
Hi, I'm Alan Wilcox. I live in Milford, Connecticut, about 16 miles east of Southport, Connecticut, the former home of Briggs Swift Cunningham. Milford is also the location of Chuck Schoendorf's shop. I wish I could say I'm a Cunningham owner, but I can't. I was one of the 4-person support team at the gathering, and I tremendously enjoyed the experience. Last summer, I was attending a Lincoln Club meet in Boothbay Harbor, Maine. Tom Carter has a cottage across the street from the hotel where the meet was being held, and his automotive curiosity brought him over to look at our Lincolns. He offered to speak that night at our banquet, and after his interesting talk, invited us to see his 289 Cobra that he was keeping under a cover behind his cottage. In conversation while showing us his Cobra, he mentioned that Cunningham was the featured mark at the 2018 Greenwich Concours, and that he and Chuck were organizing the gathering. My immediate reaction was, I want to be part of it. Shortly after returning to Connecticut, I went to Chuck's shop to offer my assistance. I was delighted when he accepted my offer, and I couldn't wait till June. At the official Cunningham website, I made an interesting discovery. My late wife's great uncle, George Rice, a successful midget race car driver, had co-driven a C4R in the 1952 Le Mans with John Fitch. My mother-in-law said the family was very proud of George's accomplishment, and she passed around the photos of the car that I took at the gathering. 2 highlights of the gathering for me were the Friday tour as a passenger in Chuck's C3 Cabriolet and sailing back to Greenwich from Southport Yacht Club aboard Briggs' former yacht, Brilliant. There were 5 of us on board as passengers, and 1 was Briggs' grandson, Brian. I hope in the future to have some participation with the Cunningham owners. I enjoyed everyone I meet, and I feel that they are all wonderful people. Happy trails to you till we meet again.
If you attended the Cunningham gathering at the 2018 Greenwich Concours d'Elegance, you know it was an amazing event. It never happened before, and it probably will never happen again. One of the things you may not have seen, though, is this Facebook Live post that Haggerty had a film crew follow me around and explain each of the significant Cunninghams. So let's take a look at that. This is the largest gathering of Cunningham automobiles on Earth in history. These cars were all built, mostly built in West Palm Beach, Florida, and then bodied, some in Florida, some in Italy. This is the first Cunningham that was built. It's called a C1, and it was built as kind of a prototype to see if he could build his own cars with his own mechanics. And this is the only one here that has a Cadillac engine. All the other Cunninghams have Chrysler Hemi engines. And this one's got a Cadillac 331 cubic inch engine. And then Briggs lost his relationship with Cadillac. Cadillac figured, what are we supplying engines to a racing team for? It's not going to sell any more cars to us. Well, thankfully, Briggs went to college as a roommate with the son of the vice president of Chrysler, and so he got a Hemi deal, and that's when he started to put these cars. So this is a C2R, and you can see C stood for Cunningham. That's a C1, so that was the first Cunningham. This is a C2, and the R was a race car. So this was the C2R, the second Cunningham built, and it was a race car. So these are two of the three C2Rs that were built. One was destroyed in a race at Pebble Beach in the 50s. So there's only two on Earth, and they're right here today. This is the stereotypical Cunningham race car. It was the one that most people think of when they hear the name Cunningham. This is a C4R. So it was a Cunningham C. It was the fourth generation, and it was R for race car. This car had a 331 Chrysler Hemi, as did, well, just about all of them. Two of these were built as roadsters, and one was built as a coupe. Well, the two roadsters are here, and these ran Le Mans, and they won at Sebring, and they won at Watkins Glen, and they won at Bridgehampton, and they won at Elkhart Lake. And they didn't quite win at Le Mans, they finished as high as third. But the two on Earth, and here they are. One belongs to the Collier Collection down in Naples, Florida, and the other belongs to Fred Simeone's museum in Philadelphia. A variation of this, there's one more built, a C4RK, which was a C4R race car, but K stood for cam. It was a coupe with a cam back on it. Designed by Alfred Kamm, a German aerodynamicist. And that car is not here, it's still down at the Naples Museum. The paint is peeling off, and the owner of that car, Miles Collier, wants to keep it in climate-controlled environment. So it's not going to leave the building anymore, it's air-conditioned and heated. But we have a replica of it down the road here. Here's the next generation, C5R. That was probably the most successful Cunningham race car, and it has a Chrysler Hemi as well. It has a straight front axle and a straight rear axle. So the suspension is very much like a sprint car would have or an Indy car would have. But Le Mans was so smooth that you didn't have to have an independent suspension. So this car finished third at Le Mans. This is the car, one of one built. And I have to say that Briggs never had a small block Chevy engine. He was stuck with the 750-pound Chrysler engine. He never had disc brakes. Jaguar had the exclusive franchise on disc brakes from Dunlop, so he had to work with a huge engine, heavy engine, and drum brakes. And if he had had a small block Chevy with disc brakes, he would have won Le Mans, but he didn't, and he finished as high as third. This is the last Cunningham car built, the C6R, sixth generation Cunningham. It was originally built to have a, believe it or not, a 12-cylinder, horizontally opposed, two-stroke engine. built by Carl Kiekhaefer. Well, that was never built. He never built that motor. So it ran with an Offenhauser IndyCar type motor. And IndyCar motors never ran well on pump gas, on gasoline. They ran better on alcohol. And in France, they had low octane, 80 octane, so it burned the pistons. It never did very well. And later on, it was converted to Jaguar drivetrain. It looks very much like a Jaguar D-Type, but it's actually a Cunningham. And that was when Briggs decided, if I can't win now, Mercedes was getting involved big time, Jaguar was getting involved big time. He said, I can't compete with those guys. And that's when he stopped building cars, race cars. So that's the end of the line. This is a Ferrari 195 Inter. It was designed by Giovanni Michelotti.
They made here in the United States.
And it was built by Vignale.
Because these look like
it's a small car. It's got a 12-cylinder motor, but it's got a small 12-cylinder motor. So they could build a proportionately smaller car around that engine. They could build a smaller car because that engine, even though it's 12 cylinders, is small. But it's the same design, the same designer, the same body company as the cars that were built at the same time, the Cunninghams. So this is a Ferrari, this is a Cunningham. You can look at the little logo here, Ferrari. Look at the little logo here, Cunningham. But if you look at this car, it's the same car. Look at this chrome trim. Look at the grille.
They're saying 90 to 120.
Look at the fenders. The door handles, the push in, the little button that pushes in and out. Same door handle as that, Cunningham. And this was a Ferrari, this was an Italian accessory item. They had this cut in for like here, like this, and some of them have three-tone paint jobs. So this is a Ferrari and that's a Cunningham, but some people confused them in the early days. But this is a much huger car because he had a 750-pound motor that he had to build a car around. So it's a huge car for two people. Just to think of this huge car is only for two people. The reason he built these cars, he had to homologate his brand, his manufacturing, so he could race those cars over there. So what the cars we saw, the white with the blue stripes, were the race cars. He couldn't race those unless he built street cars. And so he had to build 25 street cars, and all 25 are here today, which is just an amazing. These cars have never been together before. So this is the very first C3. And as we walk down this lineup, you'll see subtle changes. This is the first C3, the second C3, 5206, 5207. These two cars share many things in common. Neither one of these cars have vent windows, and neither one of these cars have a cowl vent. But I have a factory memo that was produced by Cunningham after the second car was built, said, it's too hot in America. We have to have vent windows. So this is the third Cunningham built. It's got vent windows and it's got a cowl vent. So these cars in theory were cooler inside than those first two cars. These first four cars, that's the first car, second car, third car, fourth car built, came with 3-speed Cadillac transmissions. From there on, they had a fluid drive Chrysler gearbox, semi-automatic, had a clutch. You had to use the clutch for first gear, and then you could shift it without it. Briggs didn't want to have an automatic, but there were no such thing as a 4-speed in '52. He had a Cadillac 3-speed. The transmissions were breaking, so they wound up putting in this Cadillac fluid drive. So this is the third Cunningham built. This was shown at Pebble Beach. This is the fourth car built. And it's owned by Leslie Lockhart. Her father bought this thing many, many years ago. He was an enthusiast, but as he got older, he just let the car sit outside in their backyard in eastern Connecticut. And the car just rotted into the ground. Well, a couple of us went on a search mission, and we found this car, got in touch with the daughter, and we convinced her that this was a car worthy of saving. So little by little, this car's been, I guess, repurposed. The front cross member rotted out. They put a new one in. It runs now, so it's still a restoration in progress. So this car came in from California. For this event, cars have been coming in from all over the United States. So this one was purchased about 2 years ago by Cara and came in from California. This is one that I've not seen before. This has been, comes out of Gateway Auto Museum in Colorado. An unusual car in that, look at the size of the scoop on this car. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. 9 ribs going across that scoop. Look at the scoop on this car. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26 ribs wide. So it's got a triple scoop on it. You know, these cars were all handmade. You know, Luigi made that car and Tony made that car. This has got a supercharged engine. The supercharger was put on, McCullough supercharger, by a gentleman named Bill Frick. And Bill Frick had a speed shop on Long Island. This car has just finished restoration. The gentleman bought it 18 months ago. Chuck Schoendorf, my partner in crime of putting this event on. And just finished it this week. This car competed at Pebble Beach, and it finished second at Pebble Beach in a Cunningham class, which is pretty amazing. It was restored by Donovan Jaguar in Massachusetts. This car is the only Cunningham we know of. Oh, maybe there's two. C3s. Now, this was not a race car, but it's the only one we know of that raced. This car was purchased new in Argentina, and it was raced in Argentina when it was new. We have pictures of it racing through the mountains, all the sports car races. There's possibly one other car here that raced, but this was definitely, I have photos of this car racing back in the day. And here's a Cunningham that was painted white with blue stripes to match the racing colors. Now here's an interesting story. You saw my car before, the ugly car. It was owned by a Presbyterian minister at one time. And when he got rid of that car, he bought a second Cunningham. And this is the car he bought. So one Presbyterian minister owned two Cunninghams. The owner of this car, who had it in his garage for decades, said, "Would you help me sell this car?" So I helped him sell this car to that guy. And he bought it as a rough car, and as you can see, he just finished restoring it. This car, he bought it as a rough car, he just finished it, and it's been a part of Jay Leno's garage. It's been a part of that series. So this is a fresh restoration.
And I could hear this car coming down the street because the blower was whining.
Now, this car belongs to a guy who lives in Boston named Dudley Cunningham, and he only has the same name. It has no relation to the family, but he loves Cunninghams. So this is his car. This is the way you would.
I'm sorry.
This is an unmodified, restored but unmodified C3.
He's restoring my car, so
automatic transmission. It's all proper. That's the way the car would have been when you bought it new in '52. Let me just say that these cars sold for $9,000 new in '52, which means it was the most expensive American car. Made in West Palm Beach, Florida. Bodied in Italy.
To see all these Fords out there.
You could buy 3 Cadillacs for the price of a Cunningham back then. So wealthy people bought them, and that's the way they looked when you bought them. Hubcaps like that.
So I bought a car very
stately,
with full fenders,
not very sporty. So this car was owned by the Cunningham family until recently. This was the one C3 that was not sold to the public, and until just 8 years ago, this belonged to the Cunningham family. It was. I used to take Briggs' eldest daughter, Lucy, out for drives in this car. When I lived in Manhattan, I'd take the train up and we'd go for drives in this car. It's got some little special pieces done to it. It's got chrome wire wheels, a little bit different pieces. Briggs modified this car to suit his own taste. This has a fully automatic transmission, not a fluid drive. This car, if you remember the Ferrari back there we looked at, looked very much like one of these. Well, whoever owned this car in the 60s was embarrassed to own a Cunningham.
What's cool too is
he put
coupe,
Ferrari logos on it.
suicide
Put a little
doors, so
prancing horse up in front.
All the good components.
He put like Ferrari-looking pieces all over. Took all the Cunningham badging off it.
33
because he wanted to own a Ferrari.
They followed.
This car today is owned by the Revs Museum, the Collier Collection, Miles Collier in Florida. This is the car they drive on rallies and tours, and it's been modified somewhat to make it more roadworthy. But the owner, Miles Collier, says that I can convert that car back in 2 weeks to completely original. So they've done some things to it just to make it a really good road car.
This car was on the cover of.
So great car. It gets driven an awful lot. This is the first convertible built, and it's owned by Richard and Karen Atwell, and they're out of Texas.
Yeah, you know, an interesting point about these two cars.
They had to build 25 cars to race at Le Mans. So he combined 25. He built 20 coupes like this one, 20 coupes, and 5 convertibles. And this is the first convertible built.
Everything was
very, very beautiful car. I mean, you can see this green matches this green matches this green. This is all different colors, but they all go so well together.
And then, of course,
you can see the high level of
Model A Ford
trim here. This is amber on these, amber, and this is all etched, hand etched. The steering wheel's got hand etching, all these piece of hand etching, and that's for all the Cunninghams. They were handmade by craftsmen in Italy.
Segued into another collection.
So, just another standard car. This car is driven quite a bit. It's owned by a woman named Denise Lutz, and it's in Kentucky. She lives in Kentucky. She has a nice horse farm, and this car has been driven quite a bit, not only in the United States but through Europe on rallies. So a very well-used car, and I've driven this car, and boy, it moves okay. It's got knockoff rims, the Hallobrand wheels, so you can see a combination of hubcap, Chrysler wire wheel, knockoff Hallobrand wheel. These were American hot rods, and people did what they wanted to do with them, and they still do. Thank God. As you can see, this is the second convertible. So this is the third convertible built, and this was sold new to Nelson Rockefeller, the Rockefeller family, oil money. He was the governor of New York. I think he was vice president of the United States. Born into wealth. He bought this car new. This was on display at the MoMA, the Museum of Modern Art in New York City, as a collection of cars in 1952 called 10 Automobiles. This was one of the 10 automobiles that the curators of the museum felt were some of the most beautiful cars in the world. And this was one of the 10. And the other ones included a Seata and Aston Martin. Beautiful cars, but they rated this as right up there with them. Now, a friend of mine, Chuck Schoendorf, owns a few of these cars, and this is one that he picked up and decided he was not going to restore it. It was a three-tone car, originally light gray, kind of a rust color, and a darker gray, and he just sprayed it with spray cans to simulate the original paint job. So this would be the third convertible built. 1, 2, 3. Yeah. Interestingly, convertibles cost less money than coupes. The coupes were $9,000 when they were new, and the convertibles were $1,000 less. They were only $8,000. And why was that? Easier for craftspeople to stitch a top than to build an aluminum roof. So that's the only time in history where a convertible is less expensive. Now this car spent a part of its life in a junkyard in Queens, and it was destined to be crushed until a collector came along, in the 70s and said, "Oh my God, that can't happen." It's still in pretty rough shape. It has a pretty paint job, but if you look at the interior, it's a little bit ugly. So this car, it has a pretty paint job, but it needs to be restored. You look at the original seats, it still needs work. This car will be auctioned this weekend here at Greenwich, the Concours. There's a bottom auction going on. So this Cunningham's going to change hands this weekend. The most expensive Cunningham C3 that has been sold so far was $1.3 million, which is this car right here. This car belonged to, well, several owners, but more recently it belonged to Lucy Cunningham, Briggs's eldest daughter. And I spent a bit of time driving Lucy around in this car. Believe it or not, this is two-tone paint. This red is not the same as that red, and it's hard to tell the difference. It's so subtle. I think I would have made it a little bit more exaggerated than that. But anyway, this is the last convertible built, and well, here's the last C3 built. It was built in '54. The one you saw I had was built in '52. Owned by a collector in outside of Boston. So Cunningham had to build 25 cars to go racing, but they wanted to build 50, so they built extra chassis. They were called bastards, and they sold those chassis off. In '56, when Briggs got out of the business of building cars, he had all these chassis left over. What am I going to do with these chassis? This is one of the bastard chassis. This chassis was sold to Brooks Stevens, who was a designer out of Milwaukee, Wisconsin. He was very involved with Studebakers. He actually built the Excalibur race car, and then luxury cars. And so he built this body over the Cunningham chassis. So this is still a Cunningham, but it was just built with a body other than Vignali. It was built by another manufacturer. This was built in the States. So it's got some nice features, actually. I don't know where the grill came from. It's got a '55 Chevy steering wheel. You can see the dashboard is unique to this car. Everything is similar to a C3, but different. Now, if you look at this line right here, the roof line and the back window line, as compared to a C3 over here, this is totally unique. And this is very Studebaker looking. And not surprisingly, this was designed by Brooks Stevens, who was a Studebaker designer. So this has a very Studebaker look to it. So I told you there was one Cunningham that's not here. It's called the C4RK, and the K stands for coupe. C, Cunningham, 4 was the 4th generation race car, R was race car, and K stood for cams. Well, Alfred Kamm, a German aerodynamicist, designed this body for Briggs Cunningham. He actually moved to Florida for a while to help design this car. This car ran Le Mans, it ran Sebring, it ran Watkins Glen, and it won in many places. Well, that car, the original car, is in West Palm Beach, Florida. I'm sorry, it's in Naples, Florida, at the Collier Collection, the Revs Institute. The paint is peeling off, it's staying in climate-controlled environments. But this car was built over the last 5 years by my friend Chuck Schoendorf to exact dimensions of the original car. The man who owns the original car allowed us to take digital imaging of the car and build it to exact specs. The engine, the transmission, the wheels, the body is aluminum, the chassis is a Cunningham chassis. An amazing recreation, and it was built with Miles Collier's blessing. So if you remember early, down the other end, we saw 2 C4R Roadsters. Well, this was the 3rd car of the C4R range. And there actually was a book written by a guy named Peter Bodensteiner about the construction and the history of this car. These books are available online. There are 4 continuation cars. Here's 3 of them right here. The Cunningham family decided to start building cars again in the 90s. And they built them in Lime Rock, Connecticut, right across the street from the racetrack. And they built them to the same specs as they were in the old days. So if you look at this is a C4R continuation. They're still Cunningham automobiles. They were just built by the family later than when Briggs built them. Same motor, same steering box. They look just like the cars that we saw on the other end of the line, the C4Rs. But you can see it says here, Lime Rock, Connecticut. So these Cunninghams were built in Lime Rock, not West Palm Beach, Florida, where the rest of them were built. Now we're just going down a few cars that Briggs did not build, Briggs Cunningham built. This was the car he used in Europe. This is a '55 Thunderbird that he bought in the States, shipped to Europe, and when he ran Le Mans or went on vacation, whatever, this is the car he'd use in Europe. And I'm told that it has some racing history as well, back in the day, in Europe. This is a Lister Jaguar. Now, after Briggs stopped building his own cars, he started to race cars built by other people. So this is a Lister Jaguar, and he owned 2 of these cars. He won the national championship, and he ran this in 1958, 59, 60. It's a Jaguar-powered vehicle that was built by Brian Lister in England, and they ran it very successfully between, let's see, it was Walt Hanskin and I think it was Jack Crawford, if I'm not mistaken, the 2 drivers of these cars. In 1960, Briggs, along with one of his drivers, John Fitch, they approached Chevrolet and said, we'd like to run Le Mans with 3 Corvettes. This is one of the 3 Corvettes. All 3 are known. One could make it here today. So Briggs Cunningham drove one, John Fitch drove one, but it was 2 drivers per car. They ran the 24 Hours of Le Mans, and this scored a class victory in 1960. So this is again when Briggs found it was easier to race somebody else's cars than to build his own. This is a Cooper Monaco that was raced by the Cunningham team. Whether Briggs drove it or not, I'm not sure. This is a car that was owned by Briggs Cunningham and raced by Walt Hanskin, Formula Junior. And then finally has a Maserati 151. This car's got an interesting history. It's a monster of a car. They had powerful motors. They handled awfully. This car was raced for a number of years by the Cunningham team. Then he brought it to Holman and Moody in Charlotte, North Carolina, the stock car guys, and they put a 427 engine in this car, and they were going to break the world closed speed record at Daytona International Speedway in about, I think, 61 or 62. A guy named Marvin Panch was the driver, and it had old tires on it, very powerful motor, 427 Ford engine, old tires, and the car slipped, and it went upside down and went on fire. And this has gull wing doors that open up, but if it's on its roof, it can't open. And Marvin Panch almost died in this car until a guy named Tiny Lund came and picked up the car on fire and pulled Marvin out of it. So this car has been brought back from the dead, so to speak. It was burned to a crisp. I hope you've enjoyed seeing the largest gathering of Cunningham vehicles in history. If you couldn't make it to Greenwich, you got the second best seat in the house.